Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about the new Fantastic Four movie that's coming out because the second trailer for it just dropped the other day, and a lot of people are criticizing it according to, let's say, the CGI or the acting or some of the story points. But I'm going to look at it according to what I see as the message behind it. And I'm going to use the trailer and at least one article, major article, that discusses what the director says about the movie to get into why this is the exact thing that I have been predicting for years. I said years ago that when the left, when the quote unquote progressive people start to lose power, they're going to return to nostalgia, to try to get people to still swallow their lies. And that's, I think, what this entire movie is. And that's backed up by stuff said by the director, calling it Retrofuturism. But before we get there, just to let everyone know, there are links in the description and the pinned comment for my graphic novels. There is also a sign-up page for the new material that is coming out, a story called Fade to Blue. If you want to be informed when that project goes live, then leave your email on the sign-up page and you will be informed via email. And you're looking at some of the beautiful art from that project in the background. It's sort of a Indiana Jones in a film noir style. So if that sounds appealing to you at all, go on over to the sign-up page and leave your name. But back to our topic. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to talk a little bit about the trailer first, and then I'm going to give you some quotes from the article, which is Entertainment Weekly, where they talk to the actors and the director. And from there, I want to get into the meat of what this entire thing is. It's an analysis of what the story is going to look like as presented by the actors and the director and the trailer, and how it is the nostalgia of what they call retrofuturism, which is basically viewing an idealized version of the 60s as utopia. All right, so I can't actually show you the trailer in the background because YouTube doesn't like that kind of thing, but I will describe a few what I find as crucial parts of that second trailer for the Fantastic Four First Steps movie. Now, everyone's talking about the new Silver Surfer, which is a female Silver Surfer, and how bad it looks and all the CGI and how it doesn't look ready. I don't really concern myself with any of that. I want to ask the question of why in the world would they gender swap the Silver Surfer? Now you could say, well, they just want to have this actress or to have something new brought to the role. And I would say, okay, sure. But here's the thing. They've already experienced significant backlash for gender swapping the Silver Surfer. And there's an easy out for them, even in post-production, to fix the entire thing. And that would be to make this character, which is a herald of Galactus, into Nova. Because Galactus had other heralds, one of them was Nova. All you got to do is change the color of the metal around this character and you would change the entire thing. All you got to do is change the silver to gold and to take out the surfboard, and you would have a female version of the Silver Surfer, which you could use on the screen. There would be no problem with that. And again, they could do that in post-production, just with the CGI. Very easily. They wouldn't even have to put in the flaming hair. Just change the skin color from silver to gold. That's all they'd have to do. But they're not doing that. And they have no intention of doing that. And the question then becomes, why? Especially if they've experienced significant backlash against this character and having gender swap this character and the idea of gender swapping itself. Why? Why would they continue to do that? The second point, which a lot of people are bringing up, which may be a bit of a moot point, but I'll bring it up anyways, is the fact that Ben Grimm, the Thing, when he speaks, he just speaks in the actor's voice that played him at the first of the movie when he wasn't the Thing, when he was just Ben Grimm. Why are they doing that? That doesn't actually sound like the Thing. The Thing is supposed to have a gravelly voice because he's made of stone. I would say maybe they just went with a stylized version. I'm not entirely sure. But my poking suspicion of your quote-unquote progressive people in Hollywood would be to say that they've done such a thing in order to make the Thing less masculine. But we'll just leave that one off. But the third major thing that you see from this second trailer is the fact that Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, gets the, let's say, white male in a television commercial treatment throughout this movie. He is shown as inept, as not having any answers, as unsure of himself, as the one who has caused all of the problems. Sure, he may be the smartest man on the entire planet. Sure, he might have created all these rocket ships and science that no one else had come up with, but he's the one who, because of his fiddling around with things, has attracted Galactus to the planet. He doesn't know what to do about it now that it has happened. All he does is hum and ha, and besides that, part of the entire story is the fact that Invisible Girl, and that's her name, Invisible Girl, I'm not going to call her Invisible Woman, Invisible Girl, Sue Storm, is pregnant at the first of this movie, and In the trailer, you get Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, walking up to the two of them and saying, "You're going to make great parents." And then he turns to his sister and says, "You're going to make a great mother." And then he turns to Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, and says, "I'm just kidding with you. You're way over your head." So again, the leader, the supposed leader of the Fantastic Four, who has always been the leader of the Fantastic Four, Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards, is, as far as I can tell from this second trailer, going to be portrayed as, yes, intellectually smart, but still ineffectual, a buffoon, and someone who doesn't know how to handle problems. And why? Because it is my estimation from this trailer and from the article that I'm going to get into that Sue Storm is going to be the actual star of this entire movie. And she becomes the star of this movie because, of course, the quote-unquote progressive retrofuturism of an idealized utopian 60s is the backdrop of this entire movie and what the message of this movie is. But let's get into that. So the article that I'm going to be quoting from is Entertainment Weekly, so this is a fairly big publication, and it is talking directly to the actors and to the director. I'll put a link in the description for this article. You can go and read it if you want to. It's fairly long. But here's the thing. Even though it is fairly long, there is very little discussion about and from the actor who plays the Thing. The discussion about Reed Richards is very muted. There is discussion mostly about Johnny Storm and Sue Storm, Invisible Girl. Mostly about her. And I'm going to go over the Johnny Storm stuff at the first because it shows you the exact direction of this quote-unquote progressive narrative that you're going to see throughout the movie. So the actor who plays Johnny Storm says the following: "He's a man that leads with a lot of bravado, which can be an affront sometimes, but also he's funny. Myself and Kevin Feige were speaking about previous iterations of him and where we are culturally. He was branded as this womanizing, devil-may-care guy. But is that sexy these days? I don't think so. This version of Johnny Storm is less callous with other people's feelings, and hopefully there's a self-awareness about what's driving that attention-seeking behavior." So all you got to know about that entire paragraph is they're looking at him through where we are culturally today. Now, they use that as a bit of a priming of the pump to then talk about Susan Storm, Invisible Girl, and this is what they say. And by the way, I'm just going to jump into it, but it seems like from this article, I'm not entirely sure, but from this article, it appears that Sue Storm is the one that has brought about global peace. So it seems like she's a Mary Sue from the get-go. But it says, "Achieving global political peace sounds only slightly harder than synthesizing the decades-long fictional history of Sue Storm. As Marvel's first female superhero, she's been part of the Fantastic Four since its first issue. But back then, she carried the relatively demeaning codename of Invisible Girl and could only turn herself invisible and mostly functioned as a damsel in distress." And then the actress who plays Sue Storm says the following: "If you played an exact 60s Sue today, everyone would think she was a bit of a doormat. So figuring out how to capture the essence of what she represented to each generation, where the gender politics were different, and embody that today was one of the greatest joys of this." To me, that just says, yes, yes, don't you know, oh dear watcher, that it is a joy when you go to see a superhero movie to see gender politics put in there. The article then goes on to say, "Over the years, Sue evolved in several ways. Her abilities expanded from individual invisibility to control over electromagnetic light and force fields, making her arguably the team's most powerful member. At various times, she became a mother, a leader, and a skimpy-clad dominatrix named Malice. Synthesizing all these aspects into a single character was a lot of fun for Kirby being the woman who plays her, who says motherhood in particular became the key through line. Indeed, Sue's pregnancy will play a significant part in the plot of First Steps. My guess, and this is just a guess right at this point, is that Galactus is not going to be repelled by Mr. Fantastic, which is what the original story is, but that the child within Sue Storm, or after the child is born, is going to be the thing that repels Galactus. And it's probably going to be Valeria, not Franklin Richards. That's my guess. Pure guess. So the actress who plays Sue Storm went on to say, "Matt and I were really aware that there hasn't really been a mother with a baby in these superhero archetypes women have been getting. So basically, I would say we're going to get a rehashing of the, I don't know, what was it, 2006, 2008 storyline of Spider-Woman being a pregnant superhero. So yeah, they're going to drag that back up. And all the raw feminism, you can do it all, quote unquote, progressive hype around the entire thing. But moving on, the actress continues and says, "One of the things I love most from Sue's history is when she became Malice, and all her dark stuff comes out. I was obsessed with that chapter of her life, so I wanted to make sure that there were tones of malice in there with her, that she wasn't just the stereotype of a goody, sweet mother." So basically, God forbid, in a superhero movie, which is built on archetypes, which they just referenced, you have an archetype for a woman that is straightforward. No, you got to put in these complex undertones of malice. And I won't pull too much on that thread because there's not too much to pull on here, but I did do an entire video on the She-Hulk television show where they had the director there talking about the justifiable rage of She-Hulk because she was a woman and because of the patriarchy. I would dare say the same strain is running right through this Sue Storm. The actress who plays Sue Storm continues and says, "I've always been really interested in the mess of femininity. And how can you be both? How can you be all the things? Not just the tough, invincible, powerful woman, but also a mother who gives birth, which is itself a superhero act. I love that these characters are real humans in a messy family who argue and try to work it out and get things wrong." So my interpretation of that is, well, guess what you're going to see? You're going to see Sue Storm as this Mary Sue because she's tough, invincible, powerful woman. She gives birth, which is a superhero act. So she's going to be the Mary Sue. And the rest of the family, who are three guys, they're the ones who are going to get things wrong. And they're going to be set straight by Sue Storm. That's my guess there. But let's now move on to the reason for all of this. And the reason is this retrofuturism. So the movie is supposed to be set in an alternate timeline Earth in the 60s. But it is an idealized 60s. So the article goes on to talk about this when they talk to the director of the movie, who is Matt Shakeman. And the article says, "The whole retrofuturistic aesthetic of First Steps is made possible by his inventions," meaning Reed Richards' inventions. And Shakeman describes him as a combination of Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, and Robert Moses. So basically, Reed Richards has provided this retrofuturism through all of his work and all of his scientific inventions that he has created. But then they go on in the article to overshadow everything that Reed Richards does by saying the following right after. It says, "Sue has accomplished just as much in the political realm. As head of the Future Foundation," in brackets it says, "a concept taken from writer Jonathan Hickman's 21st Century Fantastic Four comics, one of the successor stories that is as beloved by fans as Lee and Kirby's originals, and where the heck they get that from, I have no clue." But it continues, "Sue has helped achieve global demilitarization and peace. When Shakeman and his collaborators say the dream of the 60s has been made real in this movie, they don't just mean rocket ships." The director then goes on to say, "If Reed Richards is the most scientifically intelligent person, then Sue Richards is the most emotionally intelligent person on the planet. Between the two of them, they build an idealistic society." Then the last quote I'll give you is from the article itself, parroting this same thing right after, saying, "But as cool as it is to see these inventions and imagine global peace, a movie about a perfect society would be boring to watch. So throughout First Steps, a great shadow will fall across this utopia." And then it goes on to talk about Galactus as being the antagonist for this entire thing. So my point is that you have this article writer, and he's talking directly to the director, and he's reflecting what the director is saying, that this retrofuturism is an idealized version of the 60s, which has advanced science as created by Mr. Fantastic and global peace as engineered by Sue Storm. And that makes the entire world a perfect society, a utopia. And this is the backdrop of the entire movie, and I would say the reason for the entire movie. Sue Storm, Sue Richards, Invisible Girl, is the avatar for this entire thing and will be seen as the capable one to bring about this idealistic version of the utopian 60s. Johnny Storm, her younger brother, will be seen as the male equivalent, which is less, but at the very least is starting to go in that direction. Reed Richards, although he is the most intelligent person on the planet, will be characterized as a ineffectual buffoon who may be the supposed leader of the Fantastic Four, but the actions of the movie will show that Sue Richards is the actual leader of the Fantastic Four. And I would dare say that the Thing is thrown in there probably for comedic effect. And this, as I said, is exactly what I've been warning people that was going to happen for 4 or 5 years now. This return to a nostalgic view in order to try to still sell this quote-unquote progressive narrative, even though progressivism is on the back foot right now. Because here's the thing. We are in the middle of a culture war. The last culture war, which turned the entire society towards the left, was in the 60s. These quote-unquote progressive people are the ideological children of the protesters in the 60s. They believe the 60s is this great shining beacon, this age of Aquarius that brought in the ability for them to do what they can do today. Therefore, the 60s is their origin point. And it has now become, especially with this movie, the idealized utopia that they dream of. And it has to be idealized because it wasn't idyllic back in the 60s. So this movie is meant to set up that kind of an idealistic society in the 60s for the people who don't know the 60s, who didn't live through the 60s, and yes, that would include me, to present it in that fashion to them so that progressivism is much more palatable. And this is what has been going on for so long now. They're just trying to make a myth out of it now because we're far enough away. But quite honestly, let me just bring in a couple of other things here. From my personal experience, in my religious tradition, things were upended when? In the 60s. And they said in order to basically modernize and get with the times. But it wasn't to modernize and get with the times, it was to get with the 60s. Because it didn't matter what decade came after that, the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, now into the 2020s, all these people want to do is live in the 60s. Which is weird because previous to that, it was all about an eternal view of the entire thing, a non-time-based view of the entire thing. But now they want, no, we are stuck within the 60s. We can't get out of that. And to view a more accessible version of that entire thing, if you look at the protests going on over the last couple of months, we'll call them protests. Some of them are just riots where they burn down cars or car companies, where they get out on the streets and chant all about how the government taking money away from things like Harvard is such an affront to everyone. What do you see? Well, you see the protesters being people mostly with white hair. And this isn't just me pointing this out. I saw a woman who was a middle-aged woman in one of these protests, and she was basically saying the same thing. She said, "Where is Gen Z? How come there are no young people here at this protest?" And other YouTubers and people in this space have been pointing out the same thing about these so-called protests and riots. It's all a bunch of white-haired people who want to relive the 60s. And again, this is not something new. As someone who is in the political sphere, who has always paid attention to a lot of different obscure things, like meetings based upon that religious tradition that I talked about earlier, or about atheism, or about postmodernism and that kind of philosophy. Back in the early 2000s, the people who attended these kinds of meetings and these kinds of rallies for such causes literally were looking around and saying to themselves, if you look around you in this room today, we have a problem. And that problem is everyone here has white hair. And this movie presents itself as if it was the solution to that problem. The solution to that problem is to make it hip and, hey, fellow kids, in a pop culture way with a massive franchise behind it and Disney to say to younger people who haven't experienced the 60s, guess what? It was an idyllic time. To say, if the 60s actually went right and we got our way, it would now be a utopia. And they're doing it because they know that their ideals are dying because the people who hold those ideals are dying. And they know they're not eternal ideas. They know they're not timeless stories or timeless ideas that are going to carry on. No, they need to pass it on to a new generation if it's going to survive. But they're not. And that is the silver lining to this entire thing. This pathetic attempt at retrofuturism, which is basically just nostalgia for the 60s, when the last time the culture was flipped in the favor of your quote-unquote progressives, that is dying. And it is dying with the people who lived it and pushed for it. And as far as I'm concerned, when it dies, nothing of value will be lost. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there is a link in the description for my new books which are coming out called Fade to Blue. If you go to that sign-up page and leave your email, you will be informed when the project goes live. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.